All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here on time. Welcome to the fourth, maybe, or fifth meeting of the RVAgreen 2050 Environment Working Group. We're so glad that you are here today with us. I'm going to put a link in the chat right now to the slides that we will be using for today's meeting, both in terms of the presentation and our activity that we'll get into in about half an hour. Feel free to follow along if you'd like, take notes. I'll also be sharing my screen. If you haven't already, feel free to change your name in the participant list to your first name, pronouns, and your organization or neighborhood that you're presenting. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So let me share my screen. All right. So at our last meeting, for anyone who wasn't there and hasn't checked out like the recording or materials yet, we started to dive into the topic of climate change and how it is impacting Richmond and our community, as well as our built infrastructure and natural assets. Today, what we're going to be doing is starting to put words to RVAgreen 2050, which is extremely exciting for me after having worked on this for a few years now, along with many of you on the call and our team. Today, we're going to be looking at some higher level language around what we seek to accomplish with RVAgreen 2050 itself. So getting right into it, our agenda today, we're going to talk about the proposed structure for RVAgreen 2050 as a plan. I'll say plan just as a placeholder term. Just know that we are not thinking about this deliverable being sort of a traditional PDF or something that's like 100 pages long. We don't know quite what it'll be yet, but we hope to get your input on that. But for now, I'm going to say plan just for ease of talking about it. We'll also talk about the kinds of inputs that will be coming into the process that we'll be going through together of drafting content for the plan. The two areas we'll concentrate on, again, are higher level sort of aims for what we are looking to accomplish with RVAgreen 2050, which are our pathways and our objectives, and we'll talk about what that means. Then we'll do some wrap up and next steps. So what we hope to do with you all today is to have you all understand where the draft content is coming from for RVAgreen 2050. We've been doing a lot internally in our team, along with many of you as partners along the way in the last 2+ years to get to this point. So we have a lot of information we've accumulated and we want to share with you in a way that makes sense and is digestible so that you can bring your own input to the process. And then we'll be reviewing, and you all will have a chance to provide your input on the actual draft content pieces, the pathway and the objectives. And then we will get ready. All of this is sort of leading into our next meeting in 2 weeks, which is where we'll be talking about more specifics, which are the strategies within RVAgreen 2050. So just as a reminder, as always, we want to start with our ground rules. You all hopefully know these by now. We'll be spending a lot of time today in discussion groups. So please voice your feedback, put it in the slides, put it in the chat, however you feel comfortable sharing, and also give time for other folks to do so as well. So this is the draft structure framework, or whatever you want to call it, for the RVAgreen 2050 deliverable. I'll be walking through the various components of this. This is an overview of sort of highest level. We have some major goals we are seeking to accomplish with RVAgreen 2050, and then we'll work our way down to the more specific levels. So as far as our goals, these goals were set via a city council resolution that was adopted last summer, I believe. Our goals for RVAgreen 2050 at the highest level are to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 with an interim reduction goal of 45% by 2030 below a 2008 baseline. And then on the climate resilience side, to prepare for, adapt, and improve the city and community's resilience to the impacts of climate change, which is what we focused on at our last meeting. And around all of this, as always, we are taking an equity-centered approach, particularly looking at racial equity, because that's where we're seeing the most disparate impacts when it comes to climate change. So moving one level down in terms of our structure to our vision, this is the vision as it stands right now. It is still a draft, but this is the version that we have been refining internally after you all looked at it, I think 2 meetings ago, and each of the working groups provided feedback. Then all of that feedback was presented to our Racial Equity and Environmental Justice Roundtable, along with a new draft, and this is where it stands now. So our current vision is that all Richmonders, regardless of their identity or neighborhood, thrive in a climate resilient and climate neutral community. And then we have these supporting principles which add some additional context to the vision. You can read those on your own, obviously. We'll add that another element we talked about having with the entire plan is some sort of glossary or list of terms and concepts. We do want to make this language accessible, but we know that we will be using terms that not everyone is familiar with. One in particular that came up in the discussion of the vision is climate neutral. And previously, I think the language here was like net zero carbon or zero carbon or something like that. And just after reviewing all of the working group feedback and the roundtable feedback, we were getting a little hung up on specifically talking about carbon or greenhouse gas emissions, which people didn't really maybe understand immediately when they read the vision. And so climate neutral is a term that we found that sort of encompasses that aspect of the plan. If you all have any feedback on this, we're not going to spend time on this in the meeting today, but please feel free to add notes right now in the chat if you'd like, add to the speaker notes on the slide, which you have access to. And also feel free to email us at any time. This draft vision will be going out to the community during our engagement period that will take place in April. So we'll be getting input on this during that time and further refining it. All right, so moving down, next after our vision, we have our community priorities, which are the 7 sort of procedural and substantive topic areas that are guiding all of the content in the plan that are sort of cross-cutting themes. These are things, again, just as a reminder that we heard directly from the community, and particularly communities on the front lines of climate change during our listening process that we undertook last summer. If you need any additional information on what these are, feel free to ask. It's on our website. And then we also drafted, as you all know, 2 meetings ago, the equity tool that we'll be using later in the process around these community priorities. So now we have our goals, our vision, and community priorities, at least in some draft form for each one for RVAgreen 2050, and we're just moving down the line in terms of our structure. Today, what we're going to be talking about are 2 elements. One is the pathways, and the other is the objectives, and we're going to talk about pathways first. So the pathways, and I'll just go straight to the next slide here so you can see. The pathways right now are really just our working groups. When we were sort of conceptualizing how to conduct the RVAgreen 2050 planning process, we came up with these 5 topic areas, buildings and energy, transportation, et cetera, that became our working groups. So that is why you all are here now. We also had drafted just internally some statements or phrases or taglines, whatever you want to call them, that help to add a little bit more context to what each working group was seeking to achieve. And so what we are asking for now your input on is, does this tagline, I guess, encompass what we are looking to achieve in our working group here? So I'm going to go to this slide. So for the environment pathway, as we'll call it, The sort of tagline is invest in ecosystem resilience, regeneration, and conservation. I'm going to turn it over to Kyla now to guide us through a little bit of a discussion on this. Kyla?
All right, so what we want you all to think about during this process is what you like about this statement, what you may not like, and what is missing. If you would like to take a couple minutes and allow yourself to digest what it says first, and then we can have a group discussion, and I'll collect all of your feedback in the notes.
Do you think it's clear that people recognize that humans are part of an ecosystem?
Are you asking if I think that the statement makes that clear, or that it's important for our group to acknowledge that?
No, I'm just kind of trying to stimulate some discussion around it.
I think the word ecosystem is very broad and needs some definition.
Jeremy was wondering, like I was wondering last time, about the people and where they show up. That's what I heard.
Yeah, that like ecosystem. I feel like, especially particular populations in Richmond would consider humans to be very separate from the ecosystem, partially driving the sorts of issues that created the need for climate action to begin with. So
thank you guys. Sorry. Carlene, you had your hand raised.
Do you think that adding some kind of a qualifier like urban ecosystem would give the implication of human involvement in that, you know, as like a tied in thing without necessarily directly saying ecosystem and humans too?
Well, I wondered if we just tag humans at the back, right? I mean, invest in ecosystem resilience, generation, and conservation for people and places in Richmond, Virginia, kind of a thing, so that it's clear that we're not just talking about the places but the people too, or something. But just a thought, not wed.
Frazier, I see your hand up.
So we're also talking about, we're talking about people, but we're also talking about wildlife, aren't we? I mean, aren't we talking about habitats and all of those components as well?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that it's important for us to understand the interconnected nature of what environments are. Like when the environment is healthy, you end up with healthy people. And so maybe us making sure that relationship is conveyed potentially.
And I think you just mentioned it right there, healthy or sustainable or something along those lines. I see resilience, which I really like, regeneration maybe, and then conservation kind of goes with it, but I think healthy is a big key point.
Todd, I see your hand raised as well.
Yeah, I think in like the millennial assessment, they talk about ecosystems and human well-being as kind of a term that's thrown around.
Mary?
Speaking as what I would call a layman, although maybe a little bit of an educated layman, I like it very much the way it is. I have a sense of ecosystem as humans and everything else, including habitat. Regeneration speaks to me, and I mean, it speaks to me very well as it is. Now, whether it would speak to somebody that was less educated than I am, I'm not sure.
This is Monica.
Yes.
I'm not able to find my raise my hand button at the moment, but and I apologize. I apparently am having some connection issues. So I was trying to get back to the previous slide. My concern is along the lines of what Rob is saying, and I couldn't look back to see if environment included the built environment. Does this speak to environmental justice as well? I can't tell.
And I can just put this, if this is helpful, back on the one with all 5 drafts, which I should say for buildings and energy, transportation and waste, those groups have looked at their draft pathway, so they are in the revision process right now.
Yeah, so I don't see an environmental justice component, which is, I think, very central to ecosystems. And as Rob described, the human elements.
Yeah, I mean, it's, oh, sorry, I'm not doing the raise hand thing.
Go for it, Rob.
I mean, it's interesting that in buildings and energy, they're accelerating equitable transition, but in environment, that piece isn't reiterated. And now, I mean, I get that it's an equitable plan that we're building, but somewhere around, and Mary, you know, I get it, but I think it depends who our audience is. I typically, I prefer to shoot for an audience that's inclusive, and then those of us who understand more can sort of, you know, get there easily. So, I mean, I for me, some part in the pathway that talks about equity, and Fraser, we can put the critters in, right? I don't mind that, but you know, something about invest in equitable systems for ecosystem resilience. I'm not sure about generation either, you know, for the human and built environment and critters. I don't know. I don't quite have that, but
I don't disagree. I like talking about people. I don't disagree that maybe saying built environment in there somewhere is important too, like to distinguish that there's these different types. Because when I think ecosystem, I think park-like.
right.
And I'm worried about that, especially with a goal of like where we need green infrastructure, and we are going to need built environment changes in here too.
Fraser.
This may be a dumb question, but isn't built environment included in buildings and energy? Isn't that? No?
So I'll just chime in here. The really, I think all of the groups are in some ways addressing both the built environment and the natural environment. So for example, buildings and energy, yes, they're looking at buildings infrastructure when it comes to like energy systems. Transportation is also looking at built things related to transportation. There may also be an environmental component to some of what they're looking at, like green roofs or something for buildings. So just wanted to say that it could be that each group in its own way is looking at both components. And I think one of the themes I'm hearing is, you know, having both the human and the natural elements included here.
Mary, is your hand raised?
No,
Okay.
sorry.
No, you're fine.
I need to,
I got you.
there we go.
This is Monica. Apologies. I'm gonna leave and try to get back because the connection is awful. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Monica.
Todd?
I was just curious, Brandon, whoever, did you all look at the Richmond 300 kind of thriving environment statement? Are there parallel, I know we're not, it's different effort, but they're related efforts, right? And Is there language there that kind of speaks to
Yes.
this?
We drafted these statements a while back, so I don't remember specifically if we looked at the thriving environment. I think it's a vision for that chapter of Richmond 300, but we did look very closely at everything within that chapter for the next sort of set of discussion, which is on objectives. For those of you who may not be as familiar, the thriving environment chapter of the Richmond 300 master plan does have a specific vision, and I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it is something directly related to RVAgreen 2050. And then that chapter is separated into 3, I think, major areas, which are clean air, clean water, and healthy and resilient communities. And we'll be getting into more of what each of those cover actually in a few minutes.
Thanks. I was curious about that. I'm just looking up right now, and here Richmond is a sustainable and resilient city with healthy air, clean water, and a flourishing ecosystem. So yeah, it doesn't actually bring in the justice component, which I agree, I think is really important to include in the statement. But it doesn't, I guess, have humans in it, but it does speak to the idea that ecosystem is not central. It's kind of at the end of the statement, kind of rather than the beginning. Just one way to think about it, and it's included with some other things.
I do like that the Richmond 300. I remember going through that process with the Richmond 300 crew and going through the different ways that we wanted to say these things. And I thought that the inclusion of like clean water, healthy air, those sorts of like set up almost like metrics to that, and not suggesting necessarily that we add in like, you know, those individual metrics, but like the idea that like, because what we're kind of aiming for is that regardless of where you live, it's basically it's equitable distribution, well, and resilience in the sense of being able to, regardless of your zip code, absorb and respond and thrive in the face of a climate stressor, in a sense. And so that it really speaks to the justice angle as being central to this, I think, as well. So I would just, I'm going to echo that. You know, invest in ecosystem, because it's almost like invest in all this stuff to achieve what?
Yeah, sorry, here I am raising my hand again. I mean, I think underlying this, as y'all have moved this forward with an equity lens, I mean, there is a clear, at least verbalized to date, notion around distribution of mitigation resources, right? I mean, we are trying to make sure that those places that have been impacted get access to resources to dig themselves somewhat out of whatever hole they might have been in. And so somewhere, you know, I mean, the justice piece or the equity piece, I mean, I think it's important to have that. I mean, I get that it drives the whole 2050, but if we're talking about environment and ecosystem resilience, there's a, yeah, that equity and people piece, I think, is important to state here, because I think it's really easy to gloss over it and get to the trees and the flowers, and isn't that lovely? And it is lovely, but it's not enough.
And
There were-
Jeremy, oh, sorry, I'm sorry, Kyla. I just wanted to respond to Jeremy, what you were saying, which is invest in this to do what? I think if we work our way back up the structure of RVAgreen 2050, we are doing whatever this becomes, we are doing it in order to achieve these 2 major goals, which are to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions and become more resilient to climate change, in an equitable sort of like equity is all around that. And the vision is what Richmond will look like when those goals are achieved, if that helps. And then and then we're getting kind of a little bit more specific with like our pathways, with how are we organizing our content, that sort of thing. And then we'll be going even deeper today with the next level, which is the objectives, which is our longer term actual things we want to get to within this pathway with our strategies, which is the next meeting. So just wanted to tie that in. So Kyle,
No, that's really helpful. That's really helpful when you're looking at it from like where you get to these different chapters, as it were, as part of the main story.
That was 7 seconds. Does anyone else have anything they would like to say regarding our draft pathway?
This is Alicia. I'll just throw something out, just hearing what everyone said, that maybe could sort of wordsmith it something like changing the invest in to something like enhance ecosystem resilience, regeneration.
If anyone is not talking, please mute your mic. Oh my goodness. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there, but something like enhance, strengthen ecosystem resilience, regeneration, and conservation through strengthening equity, biodiversity. So trying to bring in some of what everyone was saying by sort of bringing those two pieces together in the statement. So just kind of throwing that out for food for thought.
This is Monica. Also, I wanted to first apologize for all the noise again. I'm having difficulty, and I'm at home, so this is interesting. But I want to speak to in the environment, the distributive element for making sure that the environment is a healthy ecosystem for vulnerable communities. I don't see that reflected here in environment, and environment is a thing that affects everything. And as was previously stated, since equity drives this, I feel like it's an essential piece to this pathway. Thank you.
Can I ask what regeneration, if it wasn't the textbook definition, meant when this was written? And if it's the textbook definition, then I'm good.
I'm trying to remember. I would guess what we were kind of going for here was that our ecosystem, however we are defining that, and I think when we were thinking that this broadest sort of concept of ecosystem can withstand shocks of climate change and others. Regenerative in terms of it can maybe like adapt to shocks and become better, or whatever that means. And there is more of it, whatever it is. And that's the conservation part.
This is Parker, and I hate to throw a huge curveball into this, but I took a look at a number of the other plans that were in that folder. And frankly, when they talked about environment on what I'm seeing us refer to maybe as ecosystems, they were really referring to like ecosystem services and not a noun. And in the noun form, they were using a basic terminology of green space, because green space allowed for both natural occurrences, but also the built infrastructure of green infrastructure, the use of parkland, et cetera, that don't necessarily have to be about habitat. And so I just throw that out there as something that I observed in the other plans that were shared.
There is a comment in the chat that the questions regeneration versus restoration. Is that something that we would like to consider throughout the process? And then the other ones I'll just add to the bottom, but I did want to speak up on that one.
And I'll just add, Parker, both in terms of your comment and then Todd on the regeneration versus restoration kind of terminology. I think you all might be better poised to say what terms encompass things like that. So if you have a preference and if these things mean different things to you, please let us know. We are not experts in any of these areas, more generalists. So, and Janine, you had your hand up, I think.
Yeah, one of the things, the question of should we change the word regeneration to restoration, because to me, restoration has historically implied something rather heavy-handed. Regeneration sounds more like a natural process that we might just step back from and allow it to happen or just minimally facilitate. You know, things that are called, that are frequently packaged as restoration just really involve a lot of manipulation, a lot of human-made manipulations, and really aren't a natural process and may not be beneficial at all. Just my 2 cents.
Thanks, Janine. We'll go Aaron and then Todd.
I just wanted to kind of echo what Janine said. I feel like an example, like I know with Reedy Creek had a stream restoration that was supposed to occur, but they stopped that from happening because the restoration was really, in a sense, more destructive and would have, taken down a bunch of already there habitat just for what is restoration, quote unquote. But I feel like regeneration kind of just implies, you get things set in place and allow nature to regrow. It's growing. It's not just getting it to a point and then walking away. I think regeneration just sounds like regrowth and coming back better or stronger.
And I think I would echo that too. I'm more, I guess, the restoration, I feel like has different connotations among different audiences, but then, there's like restoration is a well-defined science that has lots of well-defined terminology behind it. But I feel there is the use, and I hear this more and more when it gets used, like the Reedy Creek example, or kind of when it gets used in public settings, it does have this really heavy-handed kind of connotation to it. So maybe there is a desire to kind of move away from that. Regeneration is like a new pathway. That's why I asked how you're defining it, because I'm not really that familiar if we're going to move from restoration to regeneration, and unless there is more, others have a better understanding of that being used in this sense. It's kind of new. I was curious to hear how you defined it, Brianne, and if we feel like that's, a direction that we feel more comfortable paving the way, and that's cool.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. And we frankly haven't defined it in like a formal way at all. So I think this is super helpful, and want to encourage people to please continue putting in comments in the chat. Maybe Kyla, if you want to continue putting any comments from the chat into the slide notes. I'll do a quick summary of what we heard, but then I do want to keep us moving so that we have plenty of time for the other content that we're going to be covering today. So I think some of the big themes, as you can see, we've been taking notes this whole time, but definitely want to incorporate the equity element here that is missing. Think about ecosystems and making it more clear that we're talking about both the natural world and the human element. What else? We've got some great suggestions on sort of the terminology that we've used. And let's see, being more inclusive as far as like the language that we're using. Thinking about the relationship to the built environment. So I think there's some, we have relationships here that we could address both in terms of the human element, the natural element, the built element. Is there anything that anyone didn't voice? Feel free to put it in the chat, or we'll take another minute or so for if people want to contribute anything. We'll be going back to the drawing board and presenting the next version of this with all of this feedback at our next meeting. And I see some comments coming in on the chat, so thank you all. Mary, to your question about glossary, yes, we will definitely have a glossary with this plan, both in terms of like specific terms that we are using, but also probably concepts so that we can make it clear when we're talking about various elements of RVAgreen 2050, what they mean. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to our next section. So again, just to summarize, just finished talking about the pathway. That's not the end of that discussion though, so we will be coming back to this with the next draft. Now we're going to be moving sort of down a level in terms of the RVAgreen 2050 structure to our objectives. The objectives, and any of you who have been part of any kind of planning process over your careers know that different processes and plans will define these elements or structures in different ways. So what one plan calls an objective, another plan may call an action or a goal or something like that. This is our guide to what we are calling things within RVAgreen 2050. If you have any questions or comments on this, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll also have time to talk about all of this during our breakout activity. But for the purposes of our activity, we're going to be looking at objectives, which are our longer term aims, and they're organized by the pathways that we just looked at, which is basically our working groups, of what we want to accomplish with RVAgreen 2050. At our next meeting, we're going to be talking about the next level down, which is strategies, but we know that the conversation today might naturally lead into some strategy discussion, which is okay. And then what we'll be doing after our next, so we have 2 more meetings scheduled after today to discuss the strategies and then sort of refine all of this content before it goes out to the community for input in April. What we'll be doing after that over the summer, or what you all will be doing, because I will be on maternity leave, we'll be looking at how we incorporate that community input and then think about implementation plans, which is the most specific level that we'll be getting to in the RVAgreen 2050 plan. So what we have done so far, again, internally over the last couple of years, is collected tons of examples of other cities' plans. We participated in the Richmond 300 process and a number of other elements that we are bringing together as we develop the content for RVAgreen 2050. And just as a reminder, we showed this at the last meeting, but just to sort of try to keep ourselves organized, RVAgreen 2050 is an initiative at the nexus of these three elements: equity, climate action or greenhouse gas emissions reduction, and climate resilience. And we have different tools and inputs, as we're calling them, for each element of this that we are trying to bring together in this process. We know it's a lot of content, so one of our roles is to help you all be able to pull this content as needed, to remind all of us, hey, we are thinking about greenhouse gas emission reductions with this particular strategy, but let's not forget equity or resilience as we're talking about this, that sort of thing. 2 meetings ago, we talked about one of the inputs, which is the equity screening tool. Last meeting, we talked about the climate vulnerability and risk assessment. The working groups of buildings and energy, transportation and waste will be doing a lot more on the greenhouse gas emissions reduction side than we will be in this group. So there are several inputs related to that as well. All that said, the specific things that we've used to develop draft objectives that we want to get your input on today are primarily Richmond 300. For those of you who don't know, this is our city's new master plan that was adopted just a couple months ago. Many of you were part of the process to develop that plan, and it covers a very wide range of areas and issues, with climate change and the environment and sustainability being one of them. Then we also looked at the content of Richmond 300 as it is now. We know that it might change in the future, but we looked at the way that it's organized, the kinds of, I believe they use the terms goals, objectives, and actions, I think, or strategies, I can't remember, that are in that plan that directly address things like climate action and resilience. So you can see just over here on the left, just a sampling of the various chapters of Richmond 300 that address topics that we might also address in this group. Then we also have an input that we've looked at internally, and it sounds like at least some of you have looked at as well, which is examples of plans from other cities. Not that any other city has a real shining star. We're saying this one is the best one out there, but there are some really great examples that we've looked at of climate action and resilience plans that incorporate equity. So we've looked at those as well and incorporated into this drafting objective exercise the various topics that relate to the kinds of things that we'll be talking about in this working group. And then along with that, we just want to keep in mind that we have these key elements of RVAgreen 2050 of equity, climate action, and climate resilience. And the reason I included that here was because not everything that might relate to, for example, the environment from, let's say, Richmond 300 is going to naturally make its way into RVAgreen 2050. One example for me, at least, and you can change my mind, is on the historic preservation chapter of Richmond 300. There are several strategies or actions related to preserving natural features and view sheds, which is a wonderful goal related to the environment, but doesn't maybe necessarily immediately produce something that is like an action we would specifically think about that reduces greenhouse gas emissions or increases climate resilience. There are co-benefits and certainly relationships, but I just wanted to point out that Richmond 300 is very broad, and so we're going to be focusing on some specific elements within the topics that it addresses. So all that said, these are the draft objectives for our working group for the environment pathway. Again, these are just starting points. We want your feedback on these, both in a general sense of what these three things combined address, whether there are gaps in terms of strategies we might think of later that don't necessarily fit under one of these. And then we'll also be taking time today to talk through each of these individually, the language used, the topics that are under each of these, that sort of thing. So the draft objectives, again, as they stand right now, just keeping things simple as a starting point, are provide equitable access to nature, expand and protect green infrastructure. And I will note, and we want your feedback on this, green infrastructure is, I don't know, a difficult term. People don't automatically know what that is. It's also used differently in different contexts. Here, what we're talking about is natural things that contribute to our human and ecosystem well-being. So it's tree canopy, plants and vegetation, habitats, soil, you name it. If there is another word or a way to talk about that, we want to hear it from you. And then the third objective is to enhance resilience of water resources, which is sort of encompassing both the water quality side, but also the conservation side. So we want to be thinking about, with climate change, you know, we might experience something like more droughts. We want to be conserving water for many reasons, including eventual drought planning, things like that. In addition to thinking about how water is impacting our natural systems, our communities, and our built assets. So these are the draft objectives that we are going to get your feedback on in our main activity for today. Before we go into that, I want to just say again that at our next meeting, we will be concentrating more on the strategy component of this, which is the next level down in terms of specificity. So I've just completely made up some strategies that might go under each of these objectives in case this is a helpful form of reference. But what we might think about for the strategies is more specifically, what do we want to do by a certain time in order to achieve this objective? So as we're staying a little higher level today for most of our conversation. All right, so we're going to take a break in just a minute. What we're going to do when we come back is divide into 3 groups. Everyone will have an opportunity to look at each of our 3 objectives and provide feedback through the Google Slides as well as the chat and discussion. We will have 1 facilitator per objective who will be moving around the rooms. So you will stay in your group the whole time, so you don't have to worry about switching breakout rooms. Rob, our wonderful co-chair, will be facilitating discussion around the first objective. Kyla will be looking at the second objective, and then I will be looking at the third objective. For each round, we'll take about 15 minutes, and we want you to provide your feedback again on generally, you know, the 3 objectives, but within your groups, also that specific objective, what you like, what you don't like, what's missing from that statement. We're talking about language here as well. And if there is time and we figure the conversation will naturally lead into this, start it to brainstorm potential strategies that might go under that objective. We have activity slides under in this presentation, which we'll share the link to. But there will be room on the slides for all of your feedback. So before we take a break, are there any questions at this point?
I have a question.
Yes.
Just to make, I think I'm on the right page. For today, green infrastructure is nothing man-made. It all grows or is naturally occurring in some way, although in this case, we would touch it to make it happen.
Yes.
No pervious pavement, no bioretention.
As soon as you get into your group, you can change it, because I think it's
right.
confusing.
Yeah.
We're talking about the stuff that's growing, not the stuff we make.
Right. Cool. So that's why I saw that term used in another city's plan to refer to just natural stuff. And it was the only like really broad term I found that sort of encompassed everything. You all definitely know better than me, so please revise. Monica, it looks like you have your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. As I look at these broad goals, I just wanted to offer the statement that even though we are dealing with the natural environment, the overall goal of the process, as I understand it, is greenhouse and gas emissions, which are, have little to do with nature. So I just, bring that up for our consideration and future discussions, because I'm sensing that a lot of this conversation comes from environmentalist perspectives, but it's kind of missing the thing that has caused the reason for climate action. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Thanks, Monica. Yeah, and I think that's a good opportunity, just as a reminder that RVAgreen 2050 has two overarching goals. One is on the greenhouse gas emissions reduction side. The other is our goal is to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. We know that because global warming and climate change is a worldwide issue, that even if Richmond as a community does this, we will be experiencing changes to our climate, which will impact our community. And so just in the nature of how we've divided the topics that RVAgreen 2050 will address, this group in particular, the Environment Working Group, is concentrating more on the resilience side than on the greenhouse gas emissions reduction side. The transportation, waste, and buildings groups are looking, everyone's looking at both, but they will look at more of the strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That said, there is an element that we definitely want to draw out here, Monica, to your point about how the natural environment can actually help us reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Natural spaces and like trees acting as carbon, what are they? Sinks or something, you all know better than me. Absorbing greenhouse gas emissions, natural features being added to things like built infrastructure to make them less carbon emitting, that sort of thing. So we do hope that there is crossover with these goals for each of the groups, but definitely want to acknowledge that this group in particular, we're looking more at resilience than the climate action side. So thank you, Monica.
Raising my hand and talking at the same time. Brianne and Kalia, can you help everybody understand when we go into our groups how their feedback is expected to be entered and captured?
Yes, I can just do that right now. So what we'll do when we go into our breakout groups in a few minutes, each of our three facilitators, either me, Rob, or Kyla, will direct you to one set of our activity slides within this presentation. And I'll share the link again for anyone who doesn't have it. If you have issues with Google Slides, because we know some people do, you can just speak and we will record your feedback in the notes, or you can put things in the chat as well. That's all being preserved too. So if you have trouble with Google Slides, those options are there. So what we have for each of our three objectives are three discussion questions that you can go through once you get into your groups. On the actual activity slides, and I'm showing the first one, they're all set up the same. I'm showing the first one here. You will double click in one of these Post-its if you would like to provide a comment or even a revision for that objective. If you run out of room in the Post-its, or you just want to provide feedback more generally or on like a specific point that you don't want to put on a Post-it, you can also type in the slide notes down here. Everyone should be able to access that. And then in addition, if you see someone else put a comment or a suggested revision that you like, you can take one of these stars and drag it to that Post-it. If you see something in the slide notes that you like, you can put like a little plus sign or something, or just type in all caps, "I like this," and we will see that. Let's see, what else? I think those are the primary mechanisms. Rob, does that help? Good, okay. Any other questions before we take a quick break? No, okay. I'm going to stop sharing. Before you get to take a break, we didn't have our joke at the beginning of the meeting. I have one that I would love to share with you all. So, what is the difference between a hippo and a Zippo? I'm already laughing. I can't take it. One is really big. No, one is really heavy and the other is just a little lighter. I cracked myself up. Okay, so everybody come back at 2 o'clock. Thank you. Come back at 2 o'clock. Please don't let that scare you away. And Kyla and Rob.
Did you just cut our 10-minute break to 4
No,
minutes?
no. It was 5 and the joke took 30 seconds. So
I see. Okay.
It was worth it for sure.
Just to watch you crack up, yes.
Oh, Kyla and Rob, I'm just going to set up our breakout rooms while we're in this break.
Hey, Brianne, I have
Yes.
a quick question. I may have missed it, but
All right, so Rob, Kyla. All right, I think we're good then. All right, so y'all are with me for objective number 3 for our first part of this discussion. I'm going to put the link again in the chat to our slides. I just need to get my timer good to go so that we stay on track for this meeting. While I'm doing that, feel free to take a look at what objective number 3 is, which is enhance resilience of water resources. And I'll talk a little bit about where this came from in just a second. Okay, so again, 3 draft objectives here. They're all pretty broad. We want your feedback on everything, frankly. So for this objective, we are thinking about water resources. This is drinking water, the river, rainwater, things like that. And with the language of this one around enhancing resilience, what I was kind of going for here was encompassing the, I guess, resources themselves. So conservation of, drinking water, but also quality of, let's say, the river, as well as our drinking water, which comes from the river, that sort of thing. What we are asking folks to do for our activity is, if you go to slide 27 for this one, you have our post-it notes, which you can double click in and type comments. You can also provide additional feedback in the area below the slide. Drag stars to comments you agree with, but for right now, I'll give a couple, or like 1 silent minute for folks to think to themselves about this, and then we'll start the discussion. And at any time, you can also go back up to slide 14 to see all 3 draft objectives, if that's helpful for the context that we're working in. So, any immediate thoughts you all have about this objective?
Immediate thoughts, of course, I'm going with the lens of the river. And yeah, water is going to be the key to our future, and just things that are on my mind, just to put it out there, and maybe it'll stimulate more conversation. We are seeing a lot more of the high water events in our area, which is changing the landscape around our river when it's islands and erosion issues. And so those are things I look at, which also impacts our recreational pieces to this area as well, and the accessibility to getting to the water to enjoy it. And then that brings up just another process in my mind. We've always talked about connections, and the river is kind of our lifeline when it comes to drinking water, but there's so many people who are disconnected from it as well, or don't make that connection. So enhancing it can mean a lot of different things, but I just wanted to get those out there, just some of my initial thoughts. It doesn't answer anything here, but
No, that's helpful. Bryce, can you say just real quick a little bit more about the disconnection you mentioned, is that, you mean literally people are not thinking, oh, my drinking water comes from the river?
Yes, drinking water, what they do in their yard or location within the city can have impacts to our watershed area. A big piece of it that we think about from the education side is with our, when we were doing the BWET programming through middle schoolers, is they would take this trip down to the river, but it was still not connected into their location around their school or community. So really trying to figure out ways to make that a stronger connection, to know that you have an impact on the river, on your drinking water, and to even know that your drinking water comes from there. So that's just the thoughts.
Thanks. Mary? Also, and then Fraser, sorry. Oh, Mary,
Mary.
you did.
That's what you get when you're elderly. Well, there are two such huge issues with managing the water. One is where we can't manage the water. The river, of course, what comes down from upstream has a lot more to do with flooding than than anything else. It's not our rain, it's the rain that is upstream. And that is a whole different management issue. It's how to manage the flooding. And then the other issue is managing our own runoff and what does happen with our rain and how we can recycle it and absorb it. But as I say, I'm thinking out loud here, so forgive me. But they're really two quite different issues when it comes to thinking about managing water. What happens here and what happens upstream. Sorry, it takes so long to say it.
No, this is totally a thinking out loud conversation. So thanks, Mary. Fraser?
I would echo what Bryce said. I think in terms of water sources, I think we somehow need to talk about stormwater and runoff specifically. And I think there needs to be an education process around this whole thing. As we talk about education and advocacy around the objective, I think there's just a huge disconnect between how we get our drinking water and why it's even an objective and a whole piece around, the environment and all of that, because you don't see the connection between, the runoff on 14th Street and the river and your drinking water and the flooding and the CSO and your drinking water. People just don't connect those dots. And I know we have to use the term, education in as broad a way as possible, but I do think there's some engagement and advocacy around these objectives that just has to be a drumbeat. Because if it isn't, we're talking about things, and we've talked about this a little bit in terms of the language that's used throughout this process, but we're going to end up talking about things that people can't connect to, literally. So I really feel strongly about that through the community engagement piece or whatever, but I don't think any of these objectives, particularly this one, should not include something about how we explain this.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I think it's great how water is specifically called out in this objective. My initial reaction when reading it was that it might be too specific, but I guess if objective 2, which is about expanding and protecting green infrastructure, can kind of be a catch-all for thinking about ecosystems, which might include like wetlands and other riparian habitats, then I think I'm okay with viewing objective 3 as kind of a more resource-oriented, drinking water-oriented, kind of like system-oriented objective, which is what it's kind of sounding like according to everyone's input, which is great.
Yeah, I agree. I like the system approach to all of this. And I liked what Bryce said earlier about access to the river, and that it made me think about where I access the river and what kind of water I'm swimming in when I access the river from like 42nd Street versus someone who might access the river down at Belle Isle. Like the water quality might be really different between those two places based on stormwater. Yeah. So anyways, that was one of my thoughts. And then this also brings up a question for me of like, would the city be thinking about, and this is more of a strategy, but of doing something like what New York City did with preserving upstream wetlands to secure higher quality water for their drinking resources? Like, I don't know if that's too.
I think maybe some partnership with our upstream counties, or looking to Department of Conservation Recreation, DEQ, as other folks to help with that part. But I agree, Wyatt.
Thanks, you guys. Todd?
Thanks. So I have one question, I guess, but some comments. I really like the conversation that everybody was sharing. I like the water as a systems perspective too. I will get back to the comment I think that you guys were talking about when we went to break about like, I'm not really sure where air quality and temperature kind of fits in with these primary objectives kind of either. Like when you talk about green infrastructure, that actually is a solution for water too, right? Like it's not exclusive to air. So it seems like that's kind of a solutions-based objective, whereas this one's more of a systems-based perspective. It's a little bit apples and oranges. Water is definitely critical, right? And it's important to talk about water quantity and quality issues. The thing about the RVA H2O kind of, and this I guess we'll talk about when we talk about strategies stuff, is I feel like their implementation of their, I think it's great to embrace those and wrap those into what we're talking about here, because they've thought about water a lot and the management of water in the city. But it seems like it's very much a top-down approach what they're advocating, whereas this whole way that this group that you're thinking about, this plan is more of a bottom-up approach. And I would love to see more like not run into the same issues with Reedy Creek that we talked about before, or Rattlesnake Creek that's going on now, or whatever. It's like, but actually build more momentum on these when we get the strategies from the ground up. What's unclear to me is the question part is like, does equity need to be explicitly addressed and this was even going back to our original conversations, I think, expressed in kind of each of these, how's equity explicitly expressed in this objective? It's not, right? Is it not necessary to? I'm not really sure how. And it's the second bullet in what we're supposed to consider right now, right? Where we're supposed to look at, does the objective address equity, climate action, and climate resiliency? I mean, it doesn't explicitly address equity as written. Is that a problem? I don't know how you're all thinking about it. Is that going to come out in the fine details like later on, or do each of these statements need to?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. And I'll just say, one, we have about 4 minutes left. You guys are not getting the reminders like the others that I'm typing in. So, and the reason we put that question there for discussion was we would love to hear what you all think. Do we need, so RVAgreen 2050 is always these 3 elements: equity, climate action, climate resilience. We know that we want to be at the nexus of all of those things with the plan itself. Does that mean that every single component down to a certain level, like maybe the objectives, each one should address all 3? We don't have that answer either. So I think, Todd, it could for me go either way. I do think though that some of the things that I've already heard you all talking about would give this a more equitable, like add an equity component, particularly around access and education. I'm not sure at this point how to work that into the objective language itself, but I think making that more explicit could bring that in one way. And then Todd, if I could ask, and sorry, Bryce, do you have you unmuted.
Just the equity piece that I wanted to say real quick. We are paying for this cleaner water, and I know we've gotten federal grants and other things like that, but something, if we make this a cleaner, healthier environment to clean our water systems, whether it's here or farther upstream, is there a way to reduce the amount, or certain neighborhoods have different programs in place to be able to have easier access with paying less, or something along those lines? That's just a thought that I had to kind of talk about the equity piece.
Fraser?
So RVA H2O has identified areas in terms of the clean water and the stormwater that are based on the science of the research that has been done around the neighborhoods that are, I guess, most adversely impacted. So that some of that work has already been done in terms of their priorities for cleanup and projects, and that's the lens they use to identify priorities. So some of that's already baked into efforts that are already ongoing.
Thanks, Richard.
And I was gonna say, well, maybe I really like how you guys did. You simplified the initial vision statement, which I think a lot of feedback you got in the first round was that was too complex, and you simplified it. And then you have all these additional defining statements under it. And maybe that's the way to approach this too, where you have these simple objective statements, and then the equity part comes in, and the like sub-statement, there's a bunch of the equity issues like that Bryce addressed and that others have come up. Like clearly there's equity issues and related to the paying for it, about where the flooding's occurring, about like, where pollution's occurring, all that stuff is, those could come out in kind of sub-statements or come out later on, as long as that we make sure that they're there.
Awesome. Thanks, Todd. I think that's a really cool idea. And I just want to say we have 1 minute left, and then I am going to be switching facilitators. Y'all can keep putting, I'm going to just, y'all can keep putting your comments and stuff here, but you will be moving on to, I think you'll be moving to objective number 1 next, just FYI. So, but thank you guys. This is a great start to this. And what we'll be doing each time is you will have an opportunity to build on what the previous group started to put in on their slide on their objective. So I'm going to go ahead and start moving our facilitators around. I will see you all once we reconvene as a full group. All right. Hey guys, I am moving facilitators. So Rob, hold on 1 second.
See you later.
Hi, Rob.
And Kyla is going to, oh, Kyla. Okay. Oh, she just needs to exit. That's what the deal is. Okay. So we will be looking at water resilience. I'm going to give you all a minute to read objective number 3. You can go to slide 28 if you want and start checking out some of the other comments that people have left, both in the notes and in the sticky notes, and I'll be right back.
I'm here.
Hey,
Oh.
Kyla left. Okay, I'm just making sure everybody's good. All right, thank you guys.
Okay.
23, well, that's where it starts, but the draft objective is on slide 24. It is to expand and protect green infrastructure, which
Okay, we are all set now. So we have about 14 minutes left to talk about objective number 3, which is enhance resilience of water resources. And we're on slide 28. We had a really good discussion in the first breakout room that we can build on here, but I also want to just get any immediate thoughts you all are having around this draft objective. I'll just, as a reminder, with this one, we are looking to include both water quality issues related to like the river, the water bodies that can, flow into the river, that sort of thing. Also conservation of water, both in terms of a natural resource, but also thinking about our drinking water and our water usage for other purposes. So any initial thoughts? If not, I can summarize what we talked about in the last group. Hey, Carlene, great.
I love telling people that one of my favorite things about living in Richmond is that we have some of the cleanest drinking water in the country. That I learned a few years ago. The lady who's like the head of the water treatment plant was bragging about it to me when I asked her, do you drink bottled or tap water? And I love the fact that we have very drinkable tap water. But the crisis in Flint, Michigan also educated me on municipalities will cut off their maintenance to the pipes at the street line, basically. And so the pipes that go into people's homes are privately maintained. And if your pipes that go into the homes are not properly maintained, you have risk of lead poisoning and other things of that nature, even if you have a very quality drinking water source. So I'd like to see something about like city private ownership collaboration on maintaining water quality on the private level, because that will directly impact renters and other low income people and ensure that they have access to good drinking water, since it's a natural resource we have so prevalently here.
Awesome, thank you.
I don't know how to abbreviate that down to a sticky.
I'm just putting it in the feedback, so it's in there, and something like that I think would show up more when we get to the strategies. But we're going to be taking all of this content and bringing it back to everybody in the next meeting to be like, hey, remember this thing that you said? Now we need to figure out how to do it. So yeah. Justin, did you have a comment? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off if I did.
Yeah, I was looking through the post-its from the previous group, and I think building on the work that has been done in recent years by city staff through and stakeholders across the city through the RVH2O initiative seems important. I think there's a lot of positive momentum behind that initiative, and a lot of good things are happening. And I think we, in my mind, actually building capacity behind that initiative could really help us achieve that objective number 3.
Behind RVH2O?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be a strategy for sure. We definitely don't want to, reinvent the wheel with any of this. If there's already something good happening and we can just add more to it, then let's make that a strategy.
We were really not struggling, thinking a lot in our last objective about the benefits of breadth versus specificity in these objectives. And in this one in particular, I like the breadth. I think the climate risks and benefits of the various different water resources in the city are so different, between access to the river for recreation and health, flooding, stormwater, drinking water, wastewater, all of those are so different and interact with people so differently. It's nice to have breadth and the room to interpret those within the strategies.
Thanks, Maggie. That's helpful. I'll say one idea that came up in the last group was for the objective level, one thought was we could do something similar like with what we did with the vision, which is a very broad, sort of all-encompassing statement that is accessible to people. They can read it and be like, yep, I support that. And then maybe there are sub-statements or something, I don't know, that give it a little bit more context or tell the story of what that objective means or something like that before you get into the strategy level, which is going to be very specific language on like hire a person to do this by this time with this budget, like to the extent that we can do that. So that was one idea that came up in the last group that if y'all have any feedback on, would love to hear.
Yeah, I like that because Carlene had brought up the good point that sometimes breadth and vague terminology like this gives the wiggle room to do very little. So if we can keep this statement accessible and then be specific enough to really hold ourselves accountable, that seems like the best of both worlds.
I think that if we're getting into specifics, I don't see anything on the notes about recreation. I think that Maggie kind of brought that up. And I think that based on what Mrs. Sparza said in our last group, we also have to consider the intergenerational effects of access to water recreation and being equitable in ensuring that people have access to both natural and man-made water recreation areas.
Thank you. Yeah, and that I'll just say, summing up some of the comments from the last group, Carlene, we talked a lot about equity and access, all of the above being something to bring out somehow it more explicitly in things like this, so people have a little bit more of a why. Yeah, so we have about 5 minutes left, just as a heads up. I'm going to be sending a message to the groups in just a second.
I mean, again, with that more specificity, maybe that should also include things around water safety, because water can be really dangerous too, in terms not just like it's poisonous water, but learning how to safely engage with different water areas, keeping younger children safe in those water areas, making sure that like, I personally, this is a terrible thing to admit, but I've actually never gone down to the river except for like once to go hang out. My kids were way too little and I didn't want to run the risk of like something bad happening. I don't know if we have access to lifeguards and things like that nearby the river during peak seasons, but making it a safe place that people would feel comfortable bringing their children, even smaller ones, might be a strategy to consider including in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Justin, you might know better than me, but we don't have lifeguards. There are like park rangers, and also the Richmond City Fire Department and Police Department both have water rescue units, I think, that sort of thing. So, but no one sort of stationed, watching water safety all the time.
It's a great point, Carlene. I think the best that we have right now are kind of passive signs that let people know when the river is safe or unsafe to swim in or wade in. But even that can be misleading to folks because it's a 5-foot threshold, and we all know that the river depth varies, a lot, place to place, point to point. No lifeguards. Yeah, the fire department provides water rescue, but that at that point, somebody's already at risk and is kind of we miss the opportunity to prevent that from happening.
I mean, maybe some of the funding that's being used with the police department to run that operation could be reallocated to a different, maybe not existing organization of some sort to provide safety services along the river, given the fact that the river is kind of a hub of Richmond life. And in conversations about reallocating budget, it might be a hey, we'd like funding over here kind of area.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll just say, Carlene, I was part of a group of folks just internally who were helping with the James River Park System Master Plan. And I can't say that idea like really came up as we were talking. So we talked so much about access and the river being right there and people, just giving them the tools to be able to know it's there, get there, navigate safely, but not like once you're there, it is a lot of rocks and swift currents in certain places and things if you're not familiar with. I know like even my family, they're from Virginia Beach, so they're used to a completely different type of water. And when I took my mom down to the river, she was like, "You do what in here?" Yeah. So anyway.
I know that I spent my childhood in Montana. I moved to Virginia when I was 12. And so outdoorsmanship was a big part of the culture and lifestyle, especially in Western Montana where we had mountains. And part of our PE curriculum was learning basic safety if you were out hiking and got lost, how to do little first aid things, how to be safe near water bodies, because I also am from a river city. And I don't see any type of that anywhere in Richmond curriculum. I don't see it in Virginia curriculum, that teaching of young people how to engage safely with the environment, which also would help to inspire confidence with using these services. So maybe some sort of a collaborative effort between the school system and maybe like James River or something to help encourage. I know James River does things with Parks and Rec, and my kids enjoy going down to the James River to learn about some of these things, but that's the program I pay for them to be a part of during the summertime, so that immediately disqualifies loads of Richmond families from being able to get that education side.
I love that. And I think it ties to what Rob was bringing up in our previous discussion about spaces where people feel welcomed and like it's meant for them.
Yeah.
And that absolutely ties to the access to nature and water resources.
Say the same thing. That's great. We have about a minute left, and then we're going to be switching again. So y'all have done objective 1. Is that right? Got it. Okay. I was going to say this is like the access to nature one, which is so great. I'll just say it was difficult to just like categorize these things in a way that to be able to present to you guys. So any feedback more generally is helpful as well as we wrap up this round. And Maggie, sorry I missed your question, but I am due in late April, early May.
Oh, I'm due May 9th.
I'm actually due May 6th, so we'll have a little.
And I think you live not far from me, right? You're
really?
in Oxford? Yeah, I'm right by Pony Pasture.
Yeah,
Matt,
I'm on
Lewisburg. I didn't know you were pregnant too.
Lots of babies.
Right by Rattlesnake Creek, actually. So this has been an interesting time for me to be involved in this.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, we'll pass each other with strollers.
Yeah. All right. Any last, thank you guys for all of your feedback on here. I'm going to be bringing in Kyla in just a second, but any last points that you want to make, feel free to keep starring and posting on the Post-its in the slide. No? All right. Give me a second and I'm going to shuffle some folks around and then I will see you all back in the main room in about 15 minutes after this last round.
Conversation.
Hey everybody, I don't want to break everybody up, I know, but we're going to keep going. So Kyla, I think you're going to be going to room number 1, is that right?
I'm not sure. I didn't get a notice, but I'm going to leave this breakout and see where I land.
Yeah. Well, you're in the main room now, so that's why I'm checking in on everybody.
Okay. All right.
Let me set.
Ooh. Well, it just says leave meeting. It doesn't have me enough.
Yes. So I'm going to assign you to room number 1. And now you should be good.
No.
Did you get a notification? Okay, let me try again. This is why.
Hold on. Let me see. All right, I got it now.
You got it? Okay. All right, thanks. All right, guys. And for those of you who are staying in here, I'm going to go get Rob, and he's going to join you in just a second. All right, Rob, you're just going to leave this breakout room and go into the
I've prepared them. They're ready for my
Awesome. All right. Okay, last round, you guys. We have 15 minutes. We are going to be, oh, Rob, you're just exiting breakout room and you're going into the main room. So you have to do that on your own.
And that, leave room.
Leave,
okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
Okay, so with our last round, y'all are going to be talking about objective number 3. So if you want to go to slide 29, the draft language here is enhance resilience of water resources. Extremely broad, we know. With this one, again, we are looking to address both water as a natural resource, so like quality, sort of the areas where water is, that sort of thing, as well as the conservation of it for the purposes of drinking water, how we use it, which also relates to quality, obviously. So that is all what we're trying to grasp under this. And when it comes to climate action and resilience, we're thinking about both climate impacts of things like flooding, more precipitation, droughts, but also on the conservation side, we can preserve a lot of energy if we use less water, that sort of thing. The main, you can take a little bit of time to read through what folks have written so far. I think the main points that we've heard in the last couple of groups are thinking, being more explicit about equity here, both in terms of like access to water as a resource for many purposes, as well as just education around water as a resource. And then some discussion on this being broad, which is good, but also maybe having a little bit more context in some way. So one idea that came up last time was maybe similar to the vision statement, we could have really broad objective statements, but then a little bit of a storytelling element or something to provide some context to get buy-in from people. So when they read the objective, they understand what it means and they're like, yes, I support that. And then they can learn a little bit more before they get into the really nitty-gritty stuff of the strategy level. So that's all I'll say about the last few groups. And now we want to get your input.
So, and maybe this is, okay, yeah, this is too broad for me. I guess, I mean, I'm thinking about water resource in terms of like drinking water, but like recreation, like having clean water to swim or tube or canoe or whatever you want to do. And that goes back to that access to nature thing, but also able to use water as a resource. So I don't know where I'm going with that. That's the first thing I thought of when I read that, was both drinking water and like canoeing water.
Right, yes, got it. Totally makes sense. I do think there's definitely an element that can sort of fit into the access to nature part, but we can, and this might be where we get into with the strategy level, like where does something like canoeing fit in as far as like a strategy or something, but definitely I'm recording your feedback, so that'll be incorporated.
And likewise, I mean, what about sea level rise and flooding? I mean, those are going to be issues of climate change that will affect how we maintain clean drinking water, right? But how we address them might be different than how we address drinking water through the treatment plant or something like that.
And so to Parker, to your point, I think what I'm getting is that this has the potential to be really broad in terms of what would fit under here in terms of strategies. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
And Jen, I'll just say RVH2O has come up a ton in this conversation, obviously. And I think everyone here has at some point been involved in RVH2O probably. So the general sense is RVH2O is awesome. Let's not duplicate, reinvent the wheel here. And when it comes to like the strategy part, how can we give more to that? Just like strengthen, build capacity, which is totally what we seek to do with RVAgreen 2050. Like, let's have a strategy that says hire 3 more people to implement RVH2O. Something.
Right. Yeah, I'm reading through the comments, and I can see that it's recognized and see the things we need to do as things that are not one person things.
Yes.
I guess I'd be curious where infrastructure fits in here, whether it's the plants themselves, for drinking water or wastewater, or storm drains and how big our pipes are, how many basins we have to store drinking water, their efficiency, I'm not the drinking water expert, so I don't know what changes could be made there, but I see that all as things that could play into this, but I don't know where they fit in quite.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is partially what we'll figure out in the strategy phase. One thing that we'll talk about once we reconvene is that there is also overlap between this group and other working groups. So for example, buildings and energy is also thinking about city infrastructure like the water, the various treatment plants, how they use energy and can potentially reduce that energy usage, which for something like the wastewater treatment plant, if it's more efficient overall, can it also waste, if there's any waste of water, I have no idea, reduce that while it also reduces energy. I don't know yet, but we want to just, for now, we're just capturing everything
Right.
so we can make sure it's addressed.
SPU just started harnessing heat energy off of their wastewater treatment plant, which I thought was pretty rad.
Heat energy from like the bacteria and stuff that's processing the gooey nasty.
Yep.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like a waste topic too. I don't want to get too into it, but
it's the wastiest of waste topics, to be honest.
All right, so we have about 5 minutes. I just need to send a reminder to the other groups. Will, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on this one from the, Richmond 300 perspective, which I know, if I remember correctly, I think Richmond 300 referenced RVH2O for like the vast majority of goals or actions that are in there. But any thoughts from that angle?
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about really the quality of the water and also trying to, have the city's infrastructure be more resilient to things like CSO overflow events. That's a big deal. And that's a lot of RVH2O kind of stuff as well. It got pretty broad when we worked on it, and we kind of threw a lot into there. But thinking a lot about natural water quality. So restoring the quality of streams and riparian areas, reducing water consumption. So it just had a whole host of kind of strategies associated with it. I'm not sure if this objective is trying to be as broad as that or.
Yeah, I would say probably not. I think it's probably getting broken up into different areas, particularly on the built infrastructure side of things. And when I say built, I mean built green infrastructure as well as built gray infrastructure. Yeah, so definitely looking forward to seeing how all the feedback comes together from this today's activity. But thank you, that's helpful. And Christina, I want to come back, and folks feel free to voice new ideas, but since we have a couple minutes, Christina, I wanted to come back to your comment about this just being too broad. And if you have any, thoughts, brainstorm or otherwise on maybe we split things into multiple we don't have to have 3 objectives. We can have as many as we want, ideally less than 100, but if people want 100, that's fine too. But split into multiple, or maybe there's a different way to organize things. Any thoughts you have there, feel free to type or as they come to you.
Someone else addressed it in one of these. Now I'm trying to read through. Someone suggested adding bullets to kind of identify. I don't know. I guess I just always come at things thinking about the James River itself. And so, which naturally, just because of who I am, makes me think of recreation. And it doesn't have to be a canoe. Like I said, you could tube, you could splash on the banks. There's lots of ways to enjoy the river. So I guess when I know some people are going to come at it as thinking about, drinking water and stormwater and wastewater treatment and whatnot, but I guess I was just bringing it up, and I don't know the right answer, which is why I didn't have a suggestion. It's just something to think about, and that's why I didn't know if we put that recreation side of things in with the access to nature and address it there. I guess the James River is just such a part of Richmond beyond just being this like resource that we use it for clean, like a clean water resource. I guess yeah, it's just such a part of Richmond and such a part of our recreation too.
Mm-hmm. Cool, thanks.
Kind of like finding a way to incorporate its intrinsic value.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. On a policy side, we use keep our waters fishable and swimmable, which is Clean Water Act language, but that it doesn't say canoeing, but it says you could do this stuff if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. It also helps to like make a baseline. It's not enough, but it does at least provide ground for where we build from.
And I would guess, Christina, on the opposite side of where you come at it from, there may be lots of people who don't know that we use the James River for anything, or they kind of know, but they're like, that's for like the hippie people or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So when I think of fishable and swimmable, I think about the people who are like, what? I wouldn't even like touch that water.
Right.
They don't know that it's our drinking water too. So, and I think there's a wide variety of folks, like my neighbors who use Roundup, they don't know either. So like, I think I like fishable and swimmable, and I'm wondering if there's more we could like build on to that, like to show what we mean by water being a resource at all. What do we use the water here for? I'm going to close the rooms in 1 minute, but you all keep working, talking. Any final comments about this? This isn't the end. We'll be talking about homework, and we'll be bringing all of this back to you guys at the next meeting, but any final thoughts?
I just think it'd be interesting to see how the three objectives kind of work together, and as one changes, that might force other ones to change too in some regards. So that's just the only thing that it's kind of a moving target, but.
Yes, well, I am having flashbacks to doing this for Richmond 300. So we are trying to keep things a little simpler, but it's not possible sometimes. So
I would say similar to that, sorry, Will, but we didn't really touch a whole lot on air quality. And I think there's some assumptions behind that, but whether we need to be more articulate to that.
Thanks, Parker. I'll note that in our note. Right. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in our breakout room activity. I hope that went well. I'm really enjoying seeing all the comments and looking forward / also not looking forward to bringing everything together so that we can continue talking about this at our next meeting. Parker, yes, you're still here. I just wanted to note, you mentioned air quality as being so I just wanted to make sure that you had finished that thought. I'm going to put that in our notes. Okay, great. While I am bringing back up the slides, does anyone have any general reflections or anything you'd like to share before we move on to our wrap up activity? And if not, no problem. We have one more question for you before we finish up. So this is something that we have been thinking about throughout the planning process for RVAgreen 2050 so far. And we've, this has come up naturally in our discussions, which is that even though we have these nice 5 working groups and our other groups of stakeholders who are involved in RVAgreen 2050, and we're going to be going along this process of drafting content within these 5 areas, we know there's overlap between, we talked about earlier today, buildings and energy might address something that also relates to the natural environment and some of the objectives that you all might have talked about today. So what we wanted to ask you all is if you have any ideas either now or you can share them with us later on how we could potentially better facilitate, especially in this virtual environment, collaboration across working groups We as staff are attending all of the working group meetings, obviously, and so we will be bringing ideas back and forth as they come up and saying, oh, well, you know, the transportation group talked about this thing that might actually fit under the environment group objective number 2 or something like that. We will be doing that all along. We also wanted to note that the meetings for the other working groups, if anyone is interested, are open to all. And I've shown on here the ones that are coming up next week, where the groups will start talking about strategy level content. In case anyone is interested, you can pop, you know, in and out. You don't have to be there for the whole 2 hours. If anyone has been involved in, you know, another planning process where they've seen, you know, other ideas work, we would love to hear, or any other thoughts that you all have right now.
Brianne, I'd be interested, sorry, Rob.
Go, Meg.
Just to see the lists of who's in those groups.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of that, there may be some informal collaboration when folks know people.
That's a great idea. And that's all in like our Google Drive. So I can just share those links really easily with everybody.
And then just from the equitable access side, two pieces on transportation and buildings. And I mean, one of the questions that came up is why does green space have to be other than what we're building? And why aren't we building green space in as we go? And then the other is sort of transportation and connectivity of making spaces accessible. And it seems like those were 2 places where there might be significant overlap between our group and those 2.
Rob, I'm sorry. Can you say the second one again, just so I make sure I have that thought down?
Connectivity and so Parker, again, right? You can't move the James River. It's there. It's a thing. It's one of our prime, you know, ecological assets. How do you make it accessible to folks? There's a transportation piece there potentially. There's a greenway piece there potentially. There's a multimodal aspect, right? So that thing.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
And Rob, we also talked about how thinking about like the 10-minute walk thing, how if there is a green space in your neighborhood, how to make it safe for everyone in the neighborhood to access it. So on a different scale than the JRPS.
Awesome.
I'm not sure how anybody else would feel about this, but I know that if there were a very simple recap of what happened at the other meetings and maybe posted on the RVAgreen 2050 site, where I can like just run through before this meeting, kind of see in simple bullet point format what was discussed at the other meetings, maybe any key takeaways. And if y'all want to put links to things like slides so we could really see them. I know personally, I have a very busy schedule. So even popping in and out of a 2-hour-long meeting doesn't seem quite as attainable as telling Siri to read me this page while I am doing my makeup or something. And I think I can't be the only one who wants something simple and fast as an alternative to full-on engagement, so that I can be fully engaged in this one and not trying to stress myself too thin over multiple different areas.
Definitely heard. And yes, this is actually something that will work really well for the next couple the next 2 meetings that we have scheduled before our April engagement period. We'll be compiling after today, actually, the list of draft objectives from all of the groups. So this is going to be about 20 or so sentences, just like what you read today. We'll definitely share that with everybody so you can see kind of where the groups are starting from. And then whatever platform we develop for, the actual drafting of the strategies will be shareable across all groups. It's going to be a lot, we know, but Carlene, I think that's a great idea, and we will do as much as we can to make all of that accessible to everybody.
If you'd like to follow up with me after the meeting, I might have some ideas for simplifying that process in terms of like actual execution. Just shoot me an email and we can talk about it.
I'm going to do that. Highlighting your name in my notes. All right, so I do want to wrap us up. Please feel free to share any additional thoughts with us as you think about the process and what we've done and all of that. Just to wrap up, your homework is to go back to any of these slides if you'd like and add any additional feedback. This is not the last time we're going to be asking for your feedback on The objectives we'll be revising internally and then coming back to you probably before our next meeting, where we will be then also thinking about more specifically what strategies can help us achieve these objectives. For this group, our next meeting is in 2 weeks on February 22nd. I'm going to put into the chat our quick feedback survey. Feel free to take it now to let us know how today's meeting went. The feedback we get is always super helpful. The other thing that we wanted to leave a minute open for is anyone who would like to share anything about like an upcoming event or anything related to like your organization or neighborhood. I just put into the chat something from Wafa May. She shared that the Governor's Summit on Equitable Collaboration is later this month. If you haven't heard of it, please click the link and check it out. I think it's going to have a lot of overlap with what we've talked about so far in our process. So any other updates, upcoming events, or resources that folks want to share before we sign off? Fraser?
Capitol Trees is having a community work day to weed, prune, trim, pull, get the garden, the low line in good shape for end of winter. It's on February 20th, Saturday from 10 to noon. If anybody wants to come, that'd be great.
Awesome, thank you.
This is Parker. I'd just say two things. One, Capital Region Land Conservancy is hiring for a land conservation specialist. So if anybody knows somebody looking for a position in land conservation, please look at our website or our Facebook page. They can email me. The deadline to apply is, I want to say, February 21st. And then also, I believe it begins at the end of this week, but the RVA Environmental Film Festival will also be running, and they're going to be doing it virtually. So it's a great opportunity to share some content and some incredible visual stories.
Perfect, thanks, Parker. Anyone else? I'll share all these in my follow-up email too, so everybody has links and dates. Well, it's 3 o'clock, so thank you all so much for sticking with it today. We really appreciate all of your feedback and hope that this was as productive for you all as it was for us. We will see you in 2 weeks, and feel free to reach out to us in the meantime with any thoughts or questions that you have. So thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
I have a good one.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Take care.
Screen is weird. All right, so Alicia was supposed to be coming back. Let me stop. Hold on.